Hello and welcome to my very first crochet podcast. My name is Louise and I've been crocheting a little over a year now. I've tried many crafts before, but crochet really stuck with me. First, very quickly, I will tell you about the project I'm working on. I'm making this heart sweater. The front and the back panels are done and now I'll be working on the arms. I'm following this pattern on YouTube made by Chendai DIY, and I will link the video in the description if you want to try it out for yourself. Besides the crochet, I am also a history student, so I thought why don't I use my degree to make a video so that the crochet community or whatever craft that you do can learn about its own history. To be fair, I didn't know a lot of the things I'm going to tell you. I just saw a lot of people picking up crochet during the pandemic, TikTok videos and stuff. And so one day I was in the craft store and decided to buy some yarn and a hook, and now I'm here making my first sweater. Doing my historical research, I quickly found out that there hasn't been done much research on crochet, especially not in comparison to knitting or embroidering. So in this video I will be focusing on crochet first, but then I will also place it in this broader perspective of craft in general and the place of craft in society throughout the centuries to try and explain this recent hype that craft has been going through. So get cozy and get your current project out so you can work alongside me while you listen to this video. Let's start with the origin of crochet, because the technique of crochet is why we come together as a community. There's obviously not an exact moment that we can pinpoint as the exact beginning of crochet. It's actually rather a combination of different techniques that people experimented with, and I found that those experiments were also heavily influenced by the economical situation of a certain time period. So traditionally, craft required a type of needle, something that was pointy. Think of knitting, embroidery, and sewing. For the evolution of crochet, we need to look at the development of crafts that required a hook instead of a needle. And this can be dated far back to the end of the 16th century, where people would call chain lace a form of lace making that was done by making chain stitches. Chain lace was used for making borders around clothing, like seams for cloaks or hats. While chain lace was done in the field of lace making, the use of a hook entered the field of embroidery through the technique of tambour embroidery. This was originated in China and reached to Europe by the 1760s. It was a way of producing chain stitch embroidery faster and was done by using a hook. The hook allowed one to make chain stitches on the surface of a garment. The hook itself is very small, usually around 1 mm in diameter. Finally, there were also advancements made in the field of knitting. Shepherd's knitting dates back from the 1780s and was done by using a flat hook. Essentially, it is what we would call now slip stitch crochet. At this time, people started to take tension of the thread and hook size into account as well when crafting. This indicates that working with a hook now needed practice and the technique got more sophisticated over time. In 1823, the Dutch magazine called Penelope published the first instruction for modern day crochet. It combines the technique of slip stitching from shepherd's knitting with the tambour needle. The instruction described how to make a hooked purse using chain stitches, slip stitches and single crochet. The magazine also states that using a crochet hook had become very popular in the Netherlands by the time of 1820s. Well, at this point, although popular in the Netherlands, we don't see that popularity reflected in other countries yet. The widespread practice of crochet started in Ireland under the poor circumstances of the notorious potato famine in the late 1840s. Irish people developed Irish lace, which is a technique that imitates lace but uses a crochet hook. That's why it's also called Irish crochet. They switched to crochet so they could make lace in a cheaper way. Because Irish lace was very popular among the upper middle class women of Europe and America, they could sustain their household during the famine by selling that lace. Irish crochet got so important for the economy that even children started to learn it in school. During the famine, millions of people emigrated mostly to the United States, and because almost every Irish immigrant could crochet, it spread all over the American population. In the 1840s, it got so popular in the US that new crochet hooks were being made, mostly out of steel or ivory. By the 1880s, lots of middle-class North American women crocheted, and it continued to steal the hearts and minds of all middle-class women of the Western world. At this time, crochet was used for decorative pieces, such as bedspread, throw blankets, the edges of garment, and so on. As time passed by, more magazines spread crochet instructions and patterns, and also the lower class caught on. By the 20th century, crochet broke out of the solely decorative art, and instead useful products like clothes were being made. Today you can crochet anything you like. When I started, I made a lot of amigurumi dolls, and I'm only now, after a year, making a real garment. Crochet mostly has a relaxing function nowadays. For many, it's an escape from living busy lives. Crochet is sometimes even advised as a form of therapy. I feel like in a way it's a reaction to modern society by doing something that's typically viewed as old-fashioned and finding peace in doing so. So where did that image come from that handwork is old-fashioned and something that only grandmothers do? For that, let's go back to medieval Europe. Handcraft started to get a divine element due to the rise of Christianity. It was seen as a way to connect to God. Therefore, handwork was regarded with very high respect. At the same time, women were able to work in craft guilds and being paid for their work, which was mostly embroidery at the time. When we entered the Renaissance, around the 15th and 16th century, things started to change for the crafts. Firstly, there came a real distinction between craft and art that was linked to the distinction of the mind and the body. People started to prioritize the mind, and with that, they saw real art as an intellectual process. Handwork, on the contrary, was seen as a mere physical activity, and the domain of craft lost its previous high status. Painters, poets, and sculptors rose in the social ranks and earned widespread respect, whereas crafters were pushed to the side. This idea of seeing craft as purely manual labor also had big consequences for women and played a role in the domestication of craft. Manual labor was not deemed for women, and thus women were banned from professional production, in contrast to previous times when they could work for payment in guilds. Actually, the idea that handcraft has always been a woman's job comes from the Renaissance. Both men and women used to work in guilds, and handwork was practiced in nunneries as well as monasteries. But because of that deprofessionalization, activities like embroidery had to be now done at home, and so gradually it was only performed by women. However, when the Industrial Revolution came around, craft got high praise from certain thinkers. The arts and craft movement was a reaction against the soulless produced goods on the market at the end of the 19th century. This anti-capitalist critique said that humans got too alienated from the items they consumed, so handmade objects were seen as better. I definitely feel like those ideas are still relevant today because, let's say, of the climate crisis. A lot of people these days want to try knitting, crocheting, sewing so they can be independent from the fast fashion industry. And I've come across a lot of fiber artists that advocate for sustainability. At the same time, there's a huge focus in the craft community on the intention of making a handmade piece. Asking yourself why you're making something, if you really need it, if you can buy sustainable materials to work with, and so on. That anti-capitalist element is definitely still a big part of why people do craft today. Although at the same time, the craft and art movement domesticated craft even further. By bringing craft work out of the economy, it made craft into a hobby, something that was done out of love and not for payment. It transformed handwork from an essential skill to a pastime of women. This brings us to modern day society. I've been talking here and there about why people decide to crochet today, but I want to focus in this part more on the feminist side of doing craft that played a big role in today's situation. During the 1960s and 70s, craft knew a resurgence. This is when people started to use the term fiber artist, and it means someone who works with fiber but their work is not political. But there were also women who started the craft for political reasons, so they got the title of feminist artists. They intentionally used craft for the feminist movements to try to understand the hierarchy between art and craft and its gendered divide. They tried elevating their crafted art pieces by experimenting with different techniques and materials than usual to break the art-craft divide. A famous crocheted piece is the Womb Room made by Faith Wilding in 1972 that links the male domain of architecture with the female domain of fiber art. And yet, a lot of people today associate things like crochet with a negative image of being old-fashioned and misogynistic. That originated in the second wave of feminism, also in the 70s, that found crocheting and other handwork oppressive because it was unseen, unrewarded labor and socially seen as something that had no value. Because women wanted a more active role in society, a lot of them completely broke free of the domestic arts because it was a burden for them. It was holding them back from that active role, and that negative idea holds up until today. But not for everyone. There's no denying the fact that more and more people, often young adults, are interested in crafting. That recent popularization of craft culture is called fabriculture. Its roots can be found in the 90s during the third wave feminism. Women wanted to connect and identify with womanhood of the past and celebrating their achievements, and so they looked at all the craft knowledge that older women had. It grew into bigger activism of reclaiming the word handmade by the 2000s. Early in those 2000s, people noticed that fiber art became more present in everyday public life. Often young women came together in public spaces like cafes to chat while working on their craft. Fiber artists shared their work and talked about techniques, and most importantly, they started to share their art online. And that really was the start of modern fabriculture. Between 1996 and 2002, the amount of Americans that knew how to knit doubled from 9 to 80%. So I can imagine that number today is even higher. Stitch and Bitch is a movement against the centuries-long domestication of craft, and in a way, the crochet community on YouTube and this video is an extension of that. Crochet is claiming a place in the public space. I see creators on YouTube who craft in public transport, craft accounts on social media that have thousands of followers, craft stores that are thriving, and so on. The past year I noticed that people on my university campus were even carrying handmade crochet bags out of granite squares. What's happening now in craft is truly something new. The only thing that we need to do now is normalizing doing handwork in public even more, so that hopefully one day this gender thinking that craft is something feminine will fade away. For whatever reason you started crocheting, I hope that this video made the long history of crochet and craft a little bit more clear for you. Maybe you understand your love for fiber arts a little bit better and understand why craft has gained so much popularity over the recent years. For me, it was really nice to use my historical research skills on a topic that I on one hand love, but on the other hand didn't know a lot about. If you have anything to add or comment on, please feel free to do so. I hope you have a really nice rest of your day and have fun creating whatever you want with fiber. Bye!